Hello, and welcome back to the last part of the tissue lectures. So far we have looked at the epithelia and we've looked at the connective tissue, and of the four main types we have two left: muscle and nerve. Now at this level we don't really look too much at nerve. We look at really just one of the anatomical types, the multipolar, and we don't look at all the support cells, the glia, that we could do. So we keep it quite simple at this level, so let's not overcomplicate it during this lecture. With muscle, there are three types, and again at this level we focus on skeletal with a little bit more cardiac later on. Smooth muscle we introduce, but we don't get into any great detail because structurally it's quite different from the other two. So let's get started. So, properties, muscles. Muscles have the ability to contract or to shorten. It's the only tissue type that can do this, and it requires a special anatomical structure in order to be able to do that. When we look at nerves, we find that their major property is rapid communication, not just communication but rapid, using electrical signals or the presence of charge moving through the inside of the cell, going from one point to another, which happens extremely fast. So that's their properties. So let's actually look at what types we have. Then muscle, as I said, we've got three that we look at. So we've got skeletal, cardiac and smooth. Now skeletal and cardiac look very, very similar underneath. When we look, underneath microscopy, when we're staring down a microscope. So with skeletal, we have long, thin, straight lines like that. So like a bunch of pencils all grouped together. Now, when we look at it, we sort of vaguely see, and I'll do this in a slightly different colour to try and give it some contrast. So we see these kind of striations, and these are striations. Now the muscles, the cells all line up together. So if I use this as pens, I've got three of the same size here. So they all line up together, so everything is occurring at the same point, which is why the striations appear across the muscle. And one of the key things about skeletal muscle is, like these pens, they run together, but they don't interact with each other. They're not connected to each other. So in skeletal muscle, they are striated. And the other thing that we notice is that they have, this time I'll use a red pen, nuclei running along the same cell. This is all one cell. That's why muscles are called fibers, because they're muscle fibers, because they're long and they're thin. Now, so they're striated, and they are multi-nucleate. They have many nuclei in one cell. If we compare that to the cardiac, well, initially they look very similar in that there are lots of straight lines running in there, and even more so again you see the striations. So again, cardiac muscle is striated. But this time notice that the cell running along there is branched just here into two. This one, 1, 2, has come into 1, it's branching. So there's branching. They move in and out of each other. They're not independent like the skeletal muscle cells are. They're branching in and out. Now the final thing, and importantly, let's see if I've got the... as you're going along the cell, you see these things. These are intercalated discs, and these delineate or mark the edges of the cardiac cells. They're gap junctions because they actually have little holes in them. So again, something that you see in cardiac you don't see in skeletal are intercalated discs. And finally, cardiac muscle cells are mononucleate, meaning they just have one nucleus between each intercalated disc. Whereas this is all one cell, it's not being divided, this is all one cell, 2 cells, 3 cells. So each one has one nucleus. So even though they look similar under microscopy between skeletal and cardiac, there are differences. Generally speaking, for me, I'm looking down a microscope, I'm looking for these big thick band lines, these intercalated discs. If I see them, I know I have cardiac. If I don't see them, I have skeletal. The other things I'm looking for is the branching pattern. Again, if I see branching, I have cardiac. If I don't see branching, I have skeletal. Now comparing that with smooth, smooth muscle has an almost diamond-like shape to it. Like that. And it's got, again, they're mononucleate, but this time they don't have striations. So they're non-striated, mononucleate, and they look very different from these two. Generally they're stained pink, and so you just tend to see this sort of like pink wavy material in there. Alright, so that's our 3 types of muscle and how we tell them apart. In terms of nerve, we really just look at 2 at this stage. We look at the multipolar and we look at the neuromuscular junction, because this is obviously where the multipolar, actually the axon, lands on the skeletal muscle. So if I was to add the multipolar onto this, try and do it with this one, you'd have the axon come down and then this kind of large foot-like plate coming down onto that area, and this would be the NMJ, or neuromuscular junction, and that's the stimulus. And when the stimulus comes down there and hits that, that stimulates it to shorten, as we'll see later. So multipolar, under microscopy, it'll look kind of like that. Darkening, this is the cell body here. Classically, a multipolar looks like that. These little things here are dendrites. That's the nucleus. So this is the cell body. And this long run here is the axon. This is the axon terminal, or end plate. Now, multipolar neurons carry information from the spinal cord out to the effector organ. In the case of the somatic nervous system, that's the skeletal muscles. In the case of the autonomic nervous system, that's usually organs of some type. Can also be cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. But they're carried by this shape of neuron. So it's like an arm, the cell body being the hand, the dendrites picking up is the fingers, and then the axon running along here to the next point. So the neuromuscular junction, we call it like multiple, is motor, because it's going to cause something to act. It's going to actually cause a motor action. And it's a motor end plate because as it comes down there and lands on the muscle, it's an end plate which is then going to stimulate the skeletal muscle to contract in a motor-like fashion. Very, very briefly, bipolar. Looks like that, so dendrites are here. Moves in, there's the cell body. And there's the axon. Pseudo-unipolar looks very similar. Again, dendrites. This is the movement. Cell bodies up here. And there's the axon. Now remember, I said in an earlier video, pseudo means it looks like something without being it. It was considered when it was first seen microscopically that the signal just went straight through, like once, so it's called unipolar because it just went straight through. What we now know is that the signal comes through here, goes into the cell body and comes out, so it acts very similarly to a bipolar. So it looks like a unipolar but acts like a bipolar. Alright, so that's it for the muscle tissue and the nerve tissue. Thank you for listening.